So I'm roughly 3 weeks into starting my job, and I message my boss and tell him, "Can I be real with you for a moment?" And he said, "Of course, absolutely." And I said, "Well, I have a lot of imposter syndrome. I have no idea what the heck I'm doing, and I'm afraid that I'm going to screw something up on this team." The response was, "Welcome to this industry." Later then, my boss actually did go on to reassure me that imposter syndrome is normal and that, like anyone, we all feel it in the IT industry. In today's video, I briefly want to talk about imposter syndrome and why in the field of cybersecurity and IT, we always feel it, and it's an always ever persistent reality that we all must face. I have a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to not knowing what the heck I'm talking about, not being confident enough when I do know something, but I'm afraid that I'm going to get it wrong, and just having imposter syndrome with my skill set that I've built up. So for those of you who don't know what imposter syndrome is or haven't heard of it, it's basically the internal feeling that you aren't as competent or knowledgeable as others perceive you to be. Therefore, your technical skill set, maybe your other skill sets that you offer, aren't as good as the next, and because people rely on you, say for industry expertise or an opinion, and you don't know, you aren't good enough to be in this industry. When you take a look at the industry of IT, what you will find is that it's a very broad place, very broad skills, lots of information. When you go one level further and you go into cybersecurity, you think, well, this isn't as bad as just general IT, but actually, it's very broad. What you find is that the further that you study cybersecurity or just security in general, the more you realize that you don't know that much. The IT industry and cybersecurity are ever evolving. Today you have one technology that is released, and tomorrow there's a new one. And as cybersecurity or IT professionals, we have to be on top of what's hot and what's new, navigate through the buzzwords and the acronyms, and find a source of solution to solve a problem for a business. So as a new cybersecurity professional or, a student turning into the professional career, what you find is that imposter syndrome is huge. When people rely on you as an expert for an answer and you don't know what you're talking about, or you learn something and then you realize just how much you don't know, imposter syndrome really kicks in. Oftentimes, cybersecurity professionals, security professionals, whatever, IT, they feel like they're frauds because maybe they're in this industry, they're getting paid, but perhaps they don't know everything. Unlike other professions, IT, like I said, is an ever-evolving field. And that's a double-edged sword, as they say. It's good because you get to learn a lot of new things, but also you're almost always playing a game of catch-up to learn those new things. So as a new cybersecurity professional, professional, associate, whatever you want to call it, I feel an immense amount of imposter syndrome. I don't want to screw up. Even when I do know something, oftentimes I become fragmented. I can't articulate what to say because I don't want to be wrong, and I fear that. When your team or when other people come to you and they're asking for this and you don't know what you're talking about or you don't know the answer, but you're the expert who's been hired, well, it's just lots of imposter syndrome. Now, I am a firm believer, and this is coming from, a younger kid, but I'm the firm believer that if you take a look at the greats within the cybersecurity industry, people who've had years of experience, the ones that truly I think are authentic are the ones who kind of admit that they've gone through periods of imposter syndrome, because you can't know everything in IT, and people who tell you otherwise, I think are just trying to maybe prove something. So as students entering in the industry, or as new cybersecurity professionals, or people who have 15 years experience, what can we do, right? I mean, this is a kid's opinion, but in my opinion, to combat imposter syndrome, there's a few things. One is reverting back to the basics, being a firm believer in what you do know. If you are good at a particular set of skills, or if you're good at programming in a language, be confident in that. Now, I should absolutely be internalizing exactly what I'm saying to the camera, but in my opinion, reverting back to the basics and being a firm believer in knowing the foundations, whether it within technology and your skill set, and just your overall confidence. Take a look at the past, and maybe there has been a part of your life that you thought you couldn't tackle a problem, but you ended up doing that. Number two is that you can't know everything. There are new concepts, there are new technologies, tools, whatever you want to say, that are coming into this industry, and you probably aren't going to know everything. So internalizing that message can be important, and kind of taking peace in knowing that you're not going to be able to know everything, but when a person or a teammate or someone comes to you for an answer, reverting back to the basics and saying, hey, you know what? I may not know this yet. And you can tell them, hey, I don't have the answer for you today, but let me get back with you. And you go back to the drawing board and you work on finding that answer or building that skill set. And I think another way to combat imposter syndrome is knowing that it's never going to end, which sucks. There are periods of time that you may be really confident in what you know, and maybe oftentimes there aren't. It's often not talked about enough because people believe that cybersecurity is very specialized, and it is to some extent, but it can be considered very broad as well. So as aspiring cybersecurity professionals, combating this is not easy. And you aren't alone in this process. It never goes away. I wanted to create this short video to tell you that you aren't alone. There are hundreds of people out on the internet who have large followings, and they are looked at as the professionals, and that's awesome. That's great. But let me tell you something. Imposter syndrome is real. It never goes away. It sucks, but at the same time, it's part of the industry. You aren't alone, is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah. Very surface level video, but something I think that needs to be talked about a little bit more in the industry. Know that you aren't alone in this imposter syndrome reality and journey of cybersecurity.